Welcome back, or if it's your first time, I'm glad to have you here. I'm Matt Fendora, and you're tuned in to the Choose to Live, Love, and Grow podcast, where we journey together toward becoming the best version of ourselves. Using mind, body, heart, and spirit as the anchors of our podcast, join me as we set sail into the depths of self-discovery, unraveling the interconnected layers that shape our growth. If you resonate with today's conversation, consider subscribing to the podcast. Your support means the world to us and ensures you never miss an empowering episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Choose to Live, Love, and Grow podcast, your go-to destination for personal growth and empowerment. Whether you're a loyal listener or a newcomer, I'm grateful for your presence. Today, we have the pleasure of chatting with Dr. Gina Cleo. Dr. Gina Cleo is one of the world's leading experts in habits and is passionate about translating scientific evidence into simple, actionable strategies to help improve health, wellness, mindset, and lifestyle-related habits long-term. Gina has a PhD in habit change, is an adjunct professor at Bonn University, and an accredited practicing dietitian. Gina's habit change research has been published in medical journals globally, and she has appeared for over 250 news outlets, including many of Australia's major television networks, ABC News, Today Show, and Studio 10. She is also a regular keynote speaker and expert panelist at national and international conferences. When she's not geeking out on the new habit research, Gina is running courses through her Habit Change Institute and obsessed over chai lattes. She has also recently published a book, The Habit Revolution. Gina is proud of several accomplishments in her life, but the one that stands out the most was how she rebuilt her life after a crushing trauma. She's proud that she did it with grace and determination. What makes Gina's heart sing? It's the little moments. It's laughing with her husband or her parents. It's the cheeky eye contact across the room. It's watching her doggo play with her friends at the beach. It's how the sun feels on her face. It's the little moments of connection, love, and cherished memories. Without further ado, here's Dr. Gina Cleo. How are you doing today, Gina?
I'm great, Matt. Thank you so much for that introduction. How are you doing?
I'm doing outstanding. It's great to see that you're having your chai latte right now while we're doing this podcast. Perfect
Sticking to
timing.
brand.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm super excited because I love how in-depth your book went, how much habits is one of the most foundational things that we have as human beings. And when it comes to success, and to have somebody who's so well versed in habits, I'm hoping that the audience takes away something or many things that they can apply today, come back, revisit this episode, and just continue learning and growing, and also buy your book.
Thank you. That would be great. I'm so glad you enjoyed it as well.
So what led you to wanting to get your PhD in habits and then writing your first book, The Habit Revolution?
Well, I started my career as a dietitian, and I found that I could help people in the short term. If people would eventually come back to my clinic wanting to work on the very same things we'd already worked on. We know that 95% of New Year's resolutions are forgotten by February. And I myself would, start this new plan of whatever, like an exercise regimen or some diet or something. And I would find myself going really great at the start and then falling off the wagon inevitably. So I became fascinated with this idea of sustainable change, of like, how do we actually say we're going to do something and achieve it and then maintain it? I don't just want to achieve something. I want to actually maintain that outcome long term. So that's what started, I guess, reading into sustainable change. And then reading became 4 years of full-time study and a PhD in habits. Now, I didn't know I was looking for habits. I was just reading neuroscience, psychology, sociology, behavioral psychology. And every research I read led to the fact that habits are the only proven method to achieving our results long term. So that's when I became, a habit expert and a habit coach. What led me to write the book? It's funny because after I finished my PhD, I was like, my writing days are over. Like, I've done a thesis now. It's humongous. Like, I'm done. And I have an agent who helps to coordinate the speaking events and things that I do. And she kept pestering me about writing a book. And I was just like, there's absolutely no way that's happening. Like, I'm not interested in doing it. Someone can rewrite my thesis. And then what I was finding is whenever I would do an interview or a presentation, like a corporate keynote, people would always ask me, do you have a book? Like, where can we get more information? And I didn't have anything to refer them to. So through a lot of persuasion, we could say coercion, but more persuasion, I decided to write a book. And I'm so glad that I did. You know, the feedback I've received from the book and the testimonies that people have shared with me has been incredible. It brings me to tears. So that's what led me to do that.
That's awesome. What are one or two key habits that throughout this process you decided to implement it in your own life that was so profound? And how did you incorporate that into your daily life?
Through the writing process, you mean?
That, or just in general, this process of you're getting your PhD and you're going through learning about all these habits.
Mm.
What habits did you create during all that process in your daily
Mm.
life that you still apply today?
Yeah, I mean, okay, my PhD was a shamble. I was like, because there was some days I'd wake up and I'd be straight in the lab and doing things straight away. And then other days, I wouldn't start till sort of midday. And because there was so much that I was taking in, I didn't really have a set routine as such. I did towards the end of the PhD where I was learning more about my brain and how it works and what it needs. And so a couple of foundational things I did is every single day I wrote something. So it was like, I'm going to write a little bit. If it's 5 minutes or an hour, it doesn't matter. I just need to put pen to paper and write something. Otherwise, I would have probably left it to the very last minute and then had to cram write this whole thesis. So that's one thing I made sure that I did. And the other thing was movement. I
Mm.
prioritized exercise as a way to support my mental health, my focus and concentration. And I really shifted my mindset from it being about, an aesthetic fitness thing to more about a tool that helped me with my studies and my writing.
That's movement, I think, is one of it's so core to who we are foundationally and like actually
Yeah.
improving our mental health and just our happiness in general. And I think
Yeah.
it's not implemented, it's not used as often as it should for
Yeah.
something. As simple as 5 minutes. All it takes is to move your body and you'll feel much better.
Yeah. I so agree. I think sometimes we want to feel motivated to start and we wait for that motivation when actually motivation is a result of action. Like we have to start and then we feel motivated after. And I think when we change that mind shift, like when we have that mind shift, we can get better at moving more regularly. But until we do that, it's just like, oh, but I don't feel like doing it. Like I don't want to do it. I'd rather just sit on the couch and, scroll through social media or something.
Hmm.
But yeah, it is so key. It's so foundational. And I also find when I speak to like real high performers, that's one of their foundational habits is regular movement.
Note to self, make sure, everybody does that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, what is a habit and how do we create a habit?
A habit is essentially a behavior or a thought or a belief system that was once upon a time an intentional behavior. You decided to do it. And then through repetition, your brain, I guess, imprinted it. And now it's something that happens automatically and subconsciously. And it's generally triggered by something in your environment, whether that's your internal or external environment. It could be a feeling or a thought, or it could be the time of day or the place that you're in or the people that you're around. So a habit is essentially an automatic action that's learned in memory through repetition and it's triggered by something. So it could be like you're putting on your seatbelt is a habit and it's triggered by sitting in the car. So that is what a habit is. How we develop habits is through consistent repetition in the same context. So, what I mean by that is the same context is either going to be the time of day, the place that you're in, what you've just done beforehand, the emotion that you're feeling, or the people that you're around. So, those are those five habit triggers. Let's say the first thing you do when you get up in the morning is check your phone. And you do that, like the very first time you do that, there's a mental link that's created between getting up and checking your phone. And that link is like a physical link that happens in the brain. The more you repeat that action, getting up and then checking your phone, the stronger that link becomes in your brain until eventually getting up just prompts you to check your phone. There's a great quote in neuroscience that it says, neurons that fire together wire together. So getting up is one neuron, checking your phone's the other neuron. And as you do them together, they get wired together. And that's how habits are developed. It's through repetition of something. And then the brain's like, well, I don't need to consciously think about that anymore. I'll make it into a habit, and that way I don't have to think about it.
So one of the things that you mention in your book is that there aren't positive and negative habits. So
Mm.
how do we create the right habits for us?
Yeah. What I meant by that is habits are not good or bad. A habit, by definition, is simply a subconscious action. And that action, the same action, can be positive for one person and negative for another person. It's really going to depend on your life, your goals, your values. You know, for example, someone with type 2 diabetes who's eating dessert every night, that's not going to be great for their health. But if someone is recovering from disordered eating or restrictive eating and they're having dessert, well, that's actually a sign of progress. That's part of their healing. So we can't say that eating dessert is a bad habit. It's just a neutral habit, and it's good for someone and not so good for someone else. How we know if our habits are valuable to us is all going to depend on our goals, what we want to achieve, what lights us up. You know, if, for example, you're doing something and it's moving you towards your goals and what you want to achieve, that's a good habit for you. And the opposite would be a not so good habit for you. And you can think about it as in a way of, if I was to continue doing this, what will my life look like in 5 years' time or 10 years' time? And if I stop doing this, what will my life look like then? And then you can kind of determine whether that habit is serving you or not.
So let's say that they go through that process and they realize that that habit isn't serving them.
Mhm.
How can they break that cycle of that habit?
There's two proven methods to breaking our habits, but really the first step to breaking any habit is deciding to do so. Change is hard. Change doesn't feel good. It's uncomfortable. It's unfamiliar. It takes effort and energy. And our brain wants us to stay in the familiar because it doesn't have to exert a lot of energy to do that. So the first thing is to decide to do it and to know it's going to be hard and go, this is going to be really tough, but I'm going to do it because it's worth it. And really dig into your why. Like, why is this more important to you? Because you're going to have to push through the pain of discomfort of that change. So, why is it more important to you than staying in the comfort of your familiarity? The two proven methods to break old habits is firstly, trying to replace that habit with, the unwanted habit with a wanted habit. So I like to use this phrase, replace, don't erase. And that's all about the fact that all our habits give us some kind of reward. You know, eating dessert every night might not be great for our health, but it does satisfy a sweet tooth. Or sleeping in when we said we'd exercise isn't great for our fitness, but it does allow us to sleep in a little longer, and that's rewarding. Every habit, good or otherwise, gives you a reward. And if you try to just stop the habit, what you're actually doing is you've now got this reward that you're used to getting that now you're no longer going to get. And your brain is like, well, this is a ripoff. Like, why would I do this? This sucks. I'd way rather get the reward. So,
Mhm.
really, the idea is to try to swap out that unwanted habit with something more positive that's still going to give you a reward. And it could be the same reward. Some people try to do a different reward. It's going to vary, depending on the person. The other way to break a habit is to avoid the trigger altogether. All our habits are triggered, like I mentioned. And if you can avoid the trigger, that that then doesn't trigger the habit, because without triggers, we don't have habits. So if, for example, I don't know, like walking into a fast food chain triggers you to order a combo meal, you could just try to not walk into the fast food chain. Like it's a really simplified, example, but it gives you an idea of trying to avoid the things that are putting us in a space where we're slipping. If having a whole bunch of sugary treats in your house prompts you to overeat in those, try not to have them in your house, for a while anyway. I think we focus so much on trying to use our willpower when our willpower is a fleeting resource, and really we need to create a positive environment that's going to help move us towards our desired, life.
So, in an example of somebody who is triggered by stress, that usually when people are triggered by stress, they do things like they're doom scrolling, or they go to those sugary foods, or they go take a nap. How is that a trigger that they can avoid?
Oh, well, de-stressing. I actually think there's a chapter or a part in my book at least where I talk about when we are stressed, like you say, Matt, like when we're stressed, fatigued, tired, exhausted, all those things, when we're hungry, we are going to seek pleasure more than ever. And that's going to look like scrolling, eating, drinking, all those things. It's really hard to try to fight that and have the resistance to those urges when we're in that state because our brain's like, I am so exhausted. I have really little resources right now. I just need a bit of pleasure. And so it's hard to push against that. It's much easier to practice and work on reducing your stress. And it's through that process, having less stress, therefore less cravings for those things that you don't want to be doing all the time. I actually think that that's a much better strategy than trying to fight against the urges.
One of the techniques that you bring up in your book is called cue monitoring. Is that something that in this case would really benefit that habit change?
Yeah, I mean, we're not always conscious of the triggers for our habits. We can say, yep, I scroll on my phone way too much, but we're not always aware why we do it or when we do it. And cue monitoring is really about bringing so much awareness and mindfulness into our day. It's when you're doing a habit, wanted or otherwise, is to think to yourself, what time of day is it? Who am I with? Where am I? What am I feeling? What have I just done beforehand? And really getting a deeper understanding of what's triggering our unwanted habits, and then being able to work on those triggers. So if I'm scrolling when I'm stressed, and that's something I don't want to be doing, what my body's actually needing in that moment is to de-stress. And I can do that through some breath work. I can do it through meditation or stretching my body or whatever it is. I'm going to my phone because it's a quick, easy, cheap dopamine hit. But what I actually need is to just slow down. And I think cue monitoring can be really powerful when done right, because we can actually give our brain and our body what it's actually asking from us.
Mhm. Could you walk us through, if somebody listening was like, what is cue monitoring? Could you walk them through what that looks like, how they could go about doing that?
Yeah, so if you think of like, let's say your daily calendar and it's got the times in it from, say, I don't know, whatever time you get up, let's say 6 a.m. all the way through to 9 p.m. And you would just put in there the types of things that you do all the time. So you'd write down like 6 a.m. I wake up. At 6:15, I have a shower. And you can do as much or as little detail as you want. It could be I drive to work, I sit at my desk, and then through that, identifying the habits that are attached to those things. You could also do it in a different way where you notice the habits. So I might get up and go, oh, I'm getting ready, like I'm exercising, for example. It's like, well, what triggered that? It was like, well, my alarm went off and I had booked a gym class. So now I'm here. So we can work it backwards and really try to identify the patterns, the cues and responses, the triggers and the habits. They're working together, and we want to be able to identify both pieces of that puzzle, because just figuring out one is kind of useless when we're trying to break it. So that's what cue monitoring is. It's what is my routine? What does my daily life look like? And how are my habits fitting into that?
So, is there a difference in a regular habit and a micro habit?
Yeah, so micro habit is a term that I really put to this idea that we might have big things we want to achieve. Like, I want to get fit, or I want to be more mindful. But those are really big things, and we can't just achieve them overnight. They can also be, our goals can be really overwhelming sometimes, which because we're ambitious. And I think that's a great thing. So a micro habit is essentially a smaller, simpler version of that big habit that you want to achieve. If getting fit is the goal, then a micro habit might be, I'm going to, work out once a week. And then you build on that. And that workout can be 10 minutes. And then you build on that as time goes on. Micro habits are especially really powerful for habits that you're struggling to start. It's like, oh, I want to do this, but I keep saying I'm going to do it and I just haven't done it yet. And it's so scary and it's unfamiliar. Micro habits are really powerful for those habits because you can ease your way into it. It's much kinder. It's much more acceptable. I've worked with someone who hadn't exercised in over 20 years. And I said to him, I just want you to put your shoes on this week. So every day, just get up and put your sneakers on. That's it. And he was able to do that and eventually now calls himself a runner. And he said to me, if you said to me at the very start, I want you to run even just around the block, I would have like left your office and be like, she's got no idea what she's talking about. And it's because I gave him something achievable and digestible, something he knew he could achieve and then build on. That is the power of micro habits.
Wow, that sounds so powerful. Just putting you would think like from the outside looking in, like, yeah, just go run around the block, go for a walk, or do something like that.
Yeah.
But it's as simple as putting your clothes out before you go out, or putting your shoes on first thing in the morning, and
Yeah.
look like you want to go, or look at the door, like something that simple.
Exactly. And that micro habit is going to be different for every person. This guy's micro habit was putting his shoes on. That's what he felt like he could achieve that every day, no matter what state he was in. For someone else, it might be walking down the road and back. For someone else, it could be a 20-minute walk. How micro that habit is going to depend on each person's capacity, the belief in themselves to achieve that task, and their overall desire. So I think the question to ask ourselves to identify how micro our micro habit should be is, what's the smallest thing that I know I can definitely do no matter what? So for me, for example, with meditation, I am a terrible meditator, but I can do breath work okay. So I've got this sort of rule that every time I sit in my chair in my office, I do 5 deep breaths. And it sounds so little, but the amount of times I get up and down and, I'm going to the bathroom, I'm grabbing a snack, I'm having a break and I'm coming back. By the end of the day, I've probably done 5 or 10 minutes of breath work for that day. And that is so much more achievable for me than if someone said, hey, let's sit down and do a 10-minute meditation. I'd be like, oh, like my brain's telling me I don't want to do that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So to me, it sounds as though you're saying for those people who have looked at habit changing, changing their life, changing their behaviors, and they come up with every excuse, or they've tried all the things and it just doesn't work, they can't change. It sounds like doing something like micro habits is what's going to help actually propel them into actually achieving those habits.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the number one predictor of successful change is self-efficacy, which is the belief in ourselves to achieve a task. When we haven't ever done something, or when we've tried to do something and we haven't succeeded at that, even if it was just like a half-ass attempt, our brain tells us that we're not likely to achieve it. Our brain's like, look, you're probably not going to get there, which is part of the reason why we might not try or might not do it. A micro habit builds our self-efficacy more than anything. Because when you do something little and you achieve it, your brain doesn't see how big or small that achievement was. It just feels a sense of achievement. And that sense of achievement is what builds our self-efficacy and makes us believe in our ability to do even more things. And that is where the power of that comes in.
Do you think that there is a number of habits that people can actually successfully achieve at a given time?
Yes, so the research shows that it's up to 3 changes at once is what our brain can handle. Now, that's creating new habits, breaking old habits, but it's also changes in our environment. Like if there's roadworks and you're having to like drive a different way to get to the office, that is a change that you have had to make. Now, that's not going to impact your entire day, but in that moment, like if you're trying to listen to a different radio station or a podcast and do something else in the car, that's going to be impacted by that. So I would say don't set more than 3 goals at one time. And research actually shows that it's much more effective to just change one thing at once, master that, get really good at that, and then build on that with either more habits that you want to change or, make it bigger.
How long does it take to actually master a habit?
You've probably heard it takes 21 days or 28 days to change a habit. That is an absolute myth. There's just no research to support that at all. It can take, I hate saying it, but it depends. It depends on how habitual you are as a person, how complex the habit is that you're trying to change. Easier habits will develop much quicker. It depends on how badly you want that change and how frequently you do it. But it takes anywhere from, research shows, about 2 weeks to up to 10 months to change a habit. How long does it take to master a habit? It's kind of one of those things where the more you do it, the more habitual and automatic and efficient it becomes. We've never really seen in research that there's this like point of no return where you don't get necessarily better at something. It just builds and builds and builds. But that point of automaticity, we call it, which is that point where you don't have to think about it anymore. You don't have to remind yourself to do it. It just happens automatically, like tying your shoelace, for example. That point of automaticity can take, anywhere 2 weeks to 10 months. The easier, the quicker.
Along that route, when somebody's actually making that change, there are times where people hit that wall where they're like, man, I can't keep going through this habit. When they hit that wall, how do they get through that?
Hmm. I mean, setbacks are inevitable. It is not if it happens, it's when it happens. And that's why whenever I am talking about habit change, I always want to bring in setback strategies. I think actually having the idea and the knowledge that you will have a fallback is really empowering, actually, because we can go, okay, this is part of the process. Like this falling over is actually part of it, and that's okay. And these are the ways that I can get back on track. And one of those is starting micro again. So reducing the size of that habit again and just starting small and building up on it. Or reducing the frequency, for example, like doing it less often during the week or whatever it might be. But consistency is the secret sauce to creating new habits. The more you do something, the more automatic it'll become. But also change is a process of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And know that the people that succeed and the people that just fall off the wagon entirely, there's no difference in the number of setbacks that they have. It's the same. The difference is that the people that succeed are really good at getting back up again. And I think that's what it needs to be. A good injection of self-compassion and getting back on the horse as quickly as you can. That's really what it's about.
Giving yourself that grace of, hey, it's okay, I made a mistake, but
Yeah.
I also know I want to keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's it. And setbacks are normal. It's a completely like acceptable and expected human experience. I'm not a robot. My capacity is going to change from day to day, and that's okay. I'm still in the process of rewiring my brain. I'm not there yet, but I can get back on track.
Are habits different between men and women?
Habits, yes and no, but yes, mostly. I think men, and this is, I'm overgeneralizing, but I think men can be a little bit more, I think, like logical in terms of, I know I've got to do this and I just do it. I think women can, and this is anecdotally, from the thousands of people I've spoken with, but women tend to carry more mental labor and have more, we've got hormones, man, like they just like mess us around. And we know, for example, like when someone's going through premenstrual syndrome or they're going through perimenopause or menopause, research shows they shop more, they're more impulsive. Like we seek dopamine more in those moments. And that's going to make it harder for us to stick to our healthy habits and easier for us to fall into not so, great habits. The research around men and women that we know is definite shows that men are more influenced by external things and women are more influenced by internal things. So women, for example, want to know, if I go out for this walk or exercise, no one in the house is going to die. Like everything's going to be fine. The kids are looked after. The oven's off. Like we're all good. Whereas men are more like, I'm going to go out and exercise because my mates are out there and they're doing it. And so that seems like a cool thing to do. And they're sort of driven more by those external things. In terms of breaking habits, again, internal, external. So they put people through a scan, like an MRI scan, scanning their brains. And they found that people who already had some sort of addiction, men and women, the men were, their stress centers were triggered by visual things that reminded them of their addiction. So let's say it was alcohol. So let's say whenever they would see pictures of alcohol, they were like, oh, now I want some, and they were craving it more. Women, on the other hand, were not stimulated by that at all. Women were triggered by things like a picture of a child suffering or the sound of a child crying. And that is what triggered their stress response and got that craving up to want to have another drink. So that's what I mean by internal, external. Men have that visual stimulation. Women are more internally and emotionally driven by things. So in our day-to-day, it could be, say you have a really uncomfortable conversation with somebody. That's going to impact a woman more than a man in terms of falling back on unwanted habits. Now, I'm overgeneralizing. I do want to say that, but that's what the research is showing in terms of the averages of how our behavior is impacted by our life.
In that first part, when you said that women go through things that when they're going through and they have those excess hormones, that they're more impulsive, what can men do to help support women stay on track with the habits and goals that they set when they're going through these changes?
Oh, that's such a beautiful question. And I think it's really relevant in any time anyone's having a setback, a man or a woman, and at any time, whether it's hormonal or for other reasons. Support is going to look different for every person. For me, sometimes I want my husband to be like, come on, let's go. Like, we're going to go out for a walk, and just like to get me doing it. And other times I just want him to give me a cuddle and be like, it's so okay that you didn't do that. Like, let's just like kick back and do this instead. So it's like women are complicated, man. So that support is gonna look different. I think the best thing to do is ask that person, how can I support you? Like, how would you like me to show up for you in these moments? I can see that you had this goal and you're not working towards it, and that's okay. What can I do to support you? I think that's probably the best thing to do.
Okay. And I think the way you said it also is in reverse for women to men as well, asking them
Yeah.
the same exact thing.
Yeah, exactly right. And doing it in love, doing it without being judgmental, without being like, hey, why don't you go for your run or whatever it is. It's
Yeah.
just doing it in a really supportive, compassionate, understanding way.
Mhm. Another thing that you talked about in your book was the intention behavior gap. What
Mhm.
is that, and how does that affect people who made these New Year's resolutions if they're part of the 5 or 9% that are still on it now?
Man, intention behavior gap is when you intend to do one thing and you end up doing something else. Like you had an intention and it didn't quite go ahead. Like I planned to go for I planned to exercise this morning, and now I'm scrolling through Facebook Marketplace for 2 hours and I've missed my gym class. Like that's that intention behavior gap. In that space, we're expecting our motivation to take over and to help us, but that's not really what's happening. Oftentimes is that we haven't linked those neural pathways in our brain yet, and we haven't created that solid habit. once we've created the habit, the intention behavior gap shrinks and we just end up doing that habit when we intend on doing it. And your second question was, how does it affect, is it the 95 or the 5% of people?
I guess both. Um, I guess my question was, how does it play a role in people who set their New Year's
Mm.
resolutions? So
And
I guess
achieve them?
everybody.
Yeah, okay. Well, with when you're starting something new, a new behavior, it's going to be foreign. There's always going to be the process of two steps forward, one step back. And so it's not going to be fluid or linear. It's going to be a shamble. And that's part of it, right? And
Mhm.
so the intention behavior gap is going to come into play on those days where you don't show up the way that you hoped that you would, where you don't do your workout or your meditation or whatever it might be. You intended to do it, but you didn't do it. Whereas the days that you do show up and you're there, there's no intention behavior gap. You intended to do it and you showed up. And again, like the more you repeat something, the more habitual it'll become, and the smaller that intention behavior gap will be.
Okay, I feel like that almost finalizes all the questions that I had. So now we'll get to the three questions which I ask all guests, and these are over the topics of what this podcast is, which is live, love, and grow.
Hmm.
So the first question that I have for you is, what advice can you share about how to create a life that leaves a positive impact on the world?
Man, that is huge. I feel like I need to quote an entire book to answer that question. So, can you actually read it again for me, please?
What advice can you share about how to create a life that leaves a positive impact on the world?
Oh man, how do you leave a positive impact on the world? I think there's so much to be said about having a spirit of generosity. And I don't necessarily mean generosity like give all your money away. I mean things like volunteering, like sharing of yourself with someone. And I think it's amazing as well, the research around how beneficial that is for the person who's giving. I volunteer, for example, Christmas every year down at the soup kitchen locally here, and we feed anywhere between 700 to 1,000 people their lunch. And I walk into it thinking that I'm helping these people who wouldn't have had a Christmas otherwise. But I walk away with my cup full every time, just feeling like so enriched by the experience.
Mhm.
And then I think all the other things that come back to having really great values, and that's going to be being true to yourself, having integrity, being an honest person, being kind. Like I think kindness is really the overarching like umbrella to all of this. Like how do we leave a positive impact? How can it not be kindness and love? Love conquers all. So it would be something like that, and the practicality of it would be the generosity.
Mhm. That leads me directly into the second question, which is, what are some practical ways people can cultivate self-love?
Self-love. I read a lot about self-compassion, and I think there are a lot of overlaps with self-love in that, because when we can have more self-compassion, we can accept ourselves more and therefore love ourselves more. I think understanding that whatever you do is a decision that you made in that moment with the tools that you had. And it's like, this is how I've chosen to deal with this situation right now. And maybe I wouldn't have done that in hindsight. But in this very moment, this is the capacity I had, the resources I had, like this is where I was at. And having so much more self-compassion for who we are and what we do, that we're not perfect. And I think it's through that lens that we can have more self-love. Self-compassion is a skill, and like with any skill, it requires practice. It requires mindset shifts, affirmations, lots of reinforcement of that self-compassion, and a really great supportive environment where you've got people around you that treat you with that same compassion.
Mhm. So this final question is one that grinds your gears
Oh,
because
okay.
I know that. So I'll ask the original question and I'll explain why or you can explain why. And then I'll
Okay.
ask the actual final question that I have for you. So
Okay.
normally what I would ask guests are, what is one actionable tip someone can do today to grow 1% better?
Oh yeah, that
But
does grind my gears.
And I understand your point in the book that you say, what is 1%? How can we actually label
Mm,
what 1% is? Because it's
yeah.
going to be different for everybody, or how do you label that? And one of the
Yeah.
quotes that you actually say in the book is seek rituals, not results.
Yes.
So
Yes.
instead, my third question for you is,
Okay. I get a special question.
can you share one of your favorite actionable tips from your book that listeners can start applying to their lives today?
I would say just start, just show up the smallest amount possible. It doesn't matter what it looks like. If your goal is to work out more, just put your shoes on. If your goal is to meditate, do 10 seconds. Just show up. I think that would be the biggest thing. Like, don't wait for tomorrow. Don't wait for Monday. Don't wait for your motivation. Wherever you are right now, as you're listening to the end of this podcast, just do like one step literally towards that thing that you want to achieve and build on that. Like, keep doing that step daily, build on that. Maybe it's 2 steps the next day or whatever it might be. But really, our motivation is the result of action. And I think we need to take more action.
Hmm. How can people connect with you?
You can jump on my website. It's drginacleo.com. And on there are links to my books, my courses. There's a free habit course, like a free habit masterclass that I've got on there that sends 5 video lessons straight to your inbox. So you can understand a bit more about creating new habits, breaking old habits, what to do when our motivation fails. I'm also on Instagram, which is also Dr. Gina Cleo, and I read all my messages. So please reach out, say hello. I love meeting new people.
And how can people support you on your journey?
Oh, that's so nice. I think how can people support me? Just be there. Like I love when people make comments on things, or I think the biggest support for me, actually, saying this now, is sharing how any of the resources that I've put out has impacted you in whatever way. I think that drives my passion more than anything, and it helps me to do more because I'm like, yes, this is helping. This is actually impactful. So don't write to me if I haven't actually been impactful. But if I have said something, or if you've read something in my book or in my courses that has helped reshape any part of you, share that with me. I think that would be the most beautiful, generous thing that would just absolutely light my fire.
Well, that's awesome. Gina, it's really great to have you on here. I really appreciate you coming on here, even though our time zones are very different. You still took the time out of your day to sit here and talk to me and share all this wealth of knowledge with everybody. And I hope that everybody goes out and reads your book because it is phenomenal. And there's
Oh,
so
thank
much
you.
actionable advice in there that people can do that can actually change their life. So I just want to acknowledge all the hard work that you put into that book.
Oh, thank you so much, Matt. That really means a lot. And yeah, it's great to chat to you today. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Choose to Live, Love, and Grow podcast. I hope you took something away from this episode that you can implement today, just like I did. Dr. Gina Cleo provided a lot of valuable information. I'd love to know what your biggest takeaway was from this episode. Let me know by sharing this episode in Instagram and tag me at Matt Findora, that's METTFINDORA, and Dr. Gina Cleo at Dr. Gina Cleo, DRGINACLEO. If you've enjoyed this episode, the ones before, and or you're looking forward to future episodes, please hit the subscribe or follow button. It helps me get this information to even more people. No matter what you choose to do, choose to live, love, and grow. Thank you, and have an outstanding day.